And sort of underpinning this is a really big myth, which most of us believe until somebody points out that it's wrong. We believe that our experience, our thoughts, our feelings could be caused by things outside of us. But that isn't true. The truth is that it's all what happens inside us starts inside us. So our feelings, I should say, arise from our thinking or our mindset. So we just call that the inside out model of reality. And, you know, our brains are way too clever and sophisticated to not be doing stuff with data that comes in through our eyes and ears and through our hands. So, you know, to suggest that what I'm experiencing inside me is directly caused by things outside of me is really dissing my brain, if I'm going to be honest about it. So I just want to give you a little demonstration of this with the story of Jim and Joe. So Jim and Joe are colleagues, and they're walking home from work one day, and they live quite close to each other. They probably work for the local council because they live that close together. And they think, oh, we'll stop off in the pub. It's Friday night. We'll stop off in the pub for a quick pint before we go home to our families. And as they're walking down the street, a young man comes around the corner, and he's got his head buried deep in his mobile. And he's just looking down, walking along the street, not really paying attention to anything. And Jim realizes that he's about to bump into Joe. And Jim gets really angry and says, Joe, move it. And Joe doesn't confused and then says, oh, yeah, sure, and gets out of the way. And the young man passes them and they carry on. And Jim says, I don't know what's wrong with young people these days. They don't pay attention. They've always got their faces in their phones. And they should really be more considerate. And Joe says, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's really curious. I wonder why they do that. And they are missing out on so much. That's really sad. So Joe is curious and Jim is just plain angry. And when they get home after their pint, Jim tells his wife the story and she says, do you know what, Jim? You were in a bad mood this morning. I don't know what's got into you, but you've probably approached the whole day from that bad mood. So I'm not surprised that you were angry and Joe was just curious. So I'm coming to myth number 1. So as you can see very clearly, it's more to do with how you're feeling at the time when the thing happens than it does to do with what that person said or done. And quite often it's about misinterpretation. And I remember when I was still married and we went to a wedding. It was a big Indian wedding. And we were on day 7. And my ex had been to every single evening event. And so that was like 6 or 7 days on the trot. I think I went to 1 or 2 of those events. And at the wedding, by the time we got to the wedding, he was ill. And he was dead grumpy, which is hardly surprising, really. And he just kept blanking me. And I thought he was angry with me. And I spoke to maybe his sister, I can't remember. And she said, no, he's not angry. He's just too ill to talk to anyone. So even though I'd been with him for, I don't know, somewhere between 15 and 20 years, I still hadn't figured that one out. So what we believe to be true is that we assume that our feelings are a direct result of what somebody said or done. And sometimes that person might have deliberately set out to hurt you. Sometimes it's because we've made meaning out of their behavior, which isn't actually what it really meant. And sometimes it's because we've been triggered, because there's something from the past that it reminds us of. I don't know, I go to the back of my head when I do this. And because we've been triggered, our reaction is probably stronger than it would have been if it had been something that didn't trigger us. But it has to do with something from the past that it reminds us of. But remembering that nobody can be the cause of your feelings makes you more powerful. Because you have actually, when you attribute cause to the other person, you give your power away. When you recognize that you have control over how you react, then you take your power back. So my first secret tool is owning your shit. So let's talk about being triggered. Recognize that you were triggered. And instead of saying, you make me so angry when you do that, you can say, I feel angry when you do that. Which brings a little curiosity, because you're kind of asking yourself, and I wonder why that is. And this way, you're not returning anger with anger. You're offending from the position of victim, which is what you're doing. Sorry, you would be offending from the position of victim if you were returning anger with anger. And you're remembering that you've created that feeling in the moment. So that's the first secret tool, and I will remind you of it at the end. Now, I've got a little exercise for you. Think of a time when you know that you mistook someone's intentions and became angry or upset because you thought they were out to hurt you in some way. What would have been different if you had realized that your feelings arose from your interpretation of their behavior as opposed to directly from their behavior? And then if you've got something to write it down on, just take 30 seconds or so to jot down some thoughts. And if you're happy to, share it in the chat.